I was at the University of Washington, and I studied population biology in New York. So Sally's a community ecologist, and I was specifically looking at gorse. And I didn't actually know all that about the grass, so that's kind of interesting. That actually gives me a lot to think about. The sand dune where I worked didn't actually line up quite with what she was describing, so I'll be interested in asking her later what she thinks of where I studied. So, I went mostly to teaching at this point. I haven't done any recent research. I finished my master's and I decided not to continue with my PhD. I don't know what it's doing. Yeah, we're leaving it out, folks. Okay, it's going. So I thought my gorse fairy would be really unique, but Sherry beat me to it. So this is my outline. One of the things I was doing was I came down to Bandon years ago. I have a cousin who lives here, and I saw gorse, and I was kind of looking for something to study, and I could see just how horrible an effect it was having around here. And a lot of people look at the impacts of these invasive plants on the communities and on the different things, but I was actually interested in seeing if I could actually plot a trajectory of what it was doing over time. So most people apparently hadn't even thought of that, but I was pretty sure gorse was more than doing just invading. It was actually changing what we were seeing. So this is my outline, and I have gone light on my research on this topic. I've actually presented my research to the Pacific Northwest IPC before. If you want a copy of it, I'm sure it's available. So I tried to go more towards the management side because that's what you guys were more interested in. And so even though a lot of you may already know about biology of gorse, I decided to sort of back up and give you a little bit of that too. So the first thing that we're interested in with population biology in these invasives actually is whether they have impacts on systems. Years ago, Seattle and Washington area was doing this big thing about getting rid of Scotch broom on the freeways, and I thought, why? What's it doing? Why are we spending all this money? And so that's sort of what got me going, like, why are we paying attention to that? And of course it turns out now they're really interested in Japanese knotweed and gorse and this sort of thing. And I'm not sure that that broom ever really was that big a problem. So when we look at describe invasive consequences on the ecosystem, usually we're trying to split it into two categories. You have people that are looking like the economics of, how much damage is this causing, how much is it going to cost us to fix, and then actual ecological impacts into the system. And so the reason why we want to look at these things is we really need to prioritize. We only have so much money, right? We need to prioritize our research and our management and our legislation. Okay, so I've actually also gotten involved, although I didn't say so in my bio, I'm actually involved with legislation now as well. So, but this particular talk is going to be about management. Okay, so this is for you guys that are interested in dealing with this plant. So there's different kinds of emphasis, and we just heard Sally talk a little bit about community ecology. You can also look at ecosystem ecology and population ecology. And people look at all of these things with invasive plants and with gorse, but most people just look at a single point in time. Okay, Sally actually was looking at community over time, which is really cool. So she was looking at things over time as well. So we want to look at some of these invasive plants because they could really change your ecosystem so dramatically that you've got issues when it comes to management later on when you're trying to restore a system. Okay. All right. So invasive plants, they can continue to have ecosystem things. So why? I wanted to look at the soil because the soil is, all land managers know that soil is actually really important, and we tend to talk about sort of above ground growth and how many leaves does it have, and what we really know is we've got to put new plants into soil, and so we need to know what's going on in the soil. So why in the world did I pick gorse? Okay. So now we're going to do the biology. All right, so it's native. Its Latin name is Ulix europaeus. It's native to Western Europe. I've seen it in a lot of its native range. It does not grow, as far as I could tell, as tall, as wide, as, you know, thick as I've seen it grow on our coast and the pictures I've seen of Australia and New Zealand. It's outrageous how big it grows here. So it's also invasive in Chile and Hawaii, on both coasts of the U.S. at this point. It's a perennial plant. It's in the Fabaceae plant family, which is the fancy name for the legume family. It grows in dense, spiny, big, huge bushes that can get up to 4 meters tall. And it's pretty closely related to Cytisus scoparius, what we know as Scotch broom. Okay, so here are some pictures of the USDA. It does not have proper leaves. It has thorns. It photosynthesizes all over its stem and on those thorns. It's one of the reasons why it doesn't respond well to quite a lot of aerial type sprays. It doesn't absorb it quite the same way. I'm not an expert on that, but I do know that, that a lot of people, when they're trying to get rid of this, actually cut and paint it because spraying it doesn't work all that well. This is a small-ish bush of gorse. And then these are the flags. They do look like your sort of standard flag flowers that legumes have. Very pretty, right? So there is a saying, and that didn't come out quite right, but when gorse is not in bloom, kissing is out of fashion, which means it's a double negative. It reads better to say when gorse is in bloom, kissing is in fashion, but the real saying actually the double negative. So it blooms all the time. Okay, and that has consequences because it has this huge seed bank. The seeds are like these little teeny tiny kidney-shaped seeds, and it just puts out tons of them all the time. It's just incredible, actually, how many seeds this plant puts out. It invades all sorts of areas, not just dunes, cleared timberland, overgrazed pasture land, and any kind of disturbed area, and sand dunes. And those little seeds get in everything. They get in your boots, they get in car tires, and so this plant has the capacity to just basically move all over the place. It grows in really thick, impenetrable stands. I know because I've taken, and I'm sure many of you in the room have actually taken chainsaws to try to get through some of these. It grows extremely rapidly. It has a really long-lived seed bank. Now, I saw some literature that was handed out that said over 30 years. There's some people actually that hypothesize it could be as long as 100 years. So the seeds basically don't seem to have a reasonable, most seeds don't have that kind of life. Of course, it's really hard to test 100 years. Okay, so it is a nitrogen fixer. It has extensive litter fall. And it has volatile organic compounds, which are quite a lot like turpentine. And that's why it burns. So when people throw the cigarette butts outside the car, you've got this dry brush. It's got these VOCs in it, and poof, we all know abandons burn down multiple times because of this plant. So this sign is no longer here, I noticed, but used to be just south of Bandon. And it was hysterical because you see all of this is gorse. Right? So field and gorse mowing, it was really working quite well at the time, as you can see. And this is 101. I mean, this isn't very far from here. And of course, this thing's shooting, it shoots seeds at least it can shoot seeds at least 3 meters. It doesn't make quite the popping sound that broom does, but it still shoots them. And they'll get on the road, and then the car tires pick it up, right? So that's one of the reasons why it's spreading so easily. This is also, this field is being overgrazed at this point, and gorse is coming in. The person who owns this field has done some work, so it doesn't look like this anymore. But olive green is sorry, this is an initial infestation of gorse. And what it's going to do is burn. Okay, so think about it having spread seeds all over this field. Okay, somebody throws a cigarette out there, right? And poof, burns everything that might have competed with it. And now you've got this wonderful mat of new gorse plants coming out, totally outcompeting everything that might have competed with it. So this is what I'm sure the land managers around here have seen. It's happening all over the place. This is a picture of the Oregon coast. I'm not exactly sure where this is, but you can bet that this probably burned at one point. And this secondary growth, notice there's nothing competing with it at this point. Okay. And Does anybody know where this is? No.
Probably Whiskey Mountain Beach.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to briefly describe my research. If anybody's interested, I can give them more information. But the tricky part about my research was to find a spot where gorse had not invaded all that long ago. So I was going to, I looked at some specific questions. I looked at more questions than this, but these are the ones that I'm going to talk about today. Which soil properties are being affected by gorse coming in? How much and how fast are they affecting these soil properties? And how does gorse on Greylen Beach, which actually was in the, Sally's pictures a couple of times, compare to other systems? So I was comparing my site to other types of research all over the world to see if I could see any kind of pattern. Okay, so this is Greylen Beach. It looks a little bit like the sand dunes that Sally was talking about. These dead sticks here, actually broom has come in and it's been attacked by something. I don't know if they figured out yet what was attacking it. It wasn't on purpose, but it was dying, and the gorse was actually still okay. It did have some of the mites and stuff on it that the broom did, but it wasn't killing the gorse. And in the background you have a wetland. Now the funny thing about Sally's thing is the foredunes over here, and then the gorse, and then the wetland. So I'm not sure, it's not quite, it wasn't exactly the way she described it. This is definitely your grass that you see in here holding the dune like crazy. The gorse is not supposed to be a wetland plant, but it was definitely growing into the wetland. One of the research questions that I would love to answer in the future, but was going to take far too much money, was to look at whether gorse actually has evolved. And now they just came out with, just published a study actually. It says that they do think gorse is evolving quite fast. And that's one of the reasons why it's so invasive. So you may or may not be able to tell whether gorse, that's been written about and tested in England may not be all that, not have the same characteristics as our gorse on our coast. So, because they definitely in England, if you read the English literature, it says it does not grow in wetlands. Okay. Here's Greylen Beach way up here, and here we are down here. The beaches and the environment fairly similar, as you probably know. Obviously, we have a different grass that I didn't know about, but generally it's the same sort of invasion. It's just that it's been down here quite a lot longer. You guys have had gorse since the 1800s, right? And it really had only come into this beach about 25, 30 years before I studied it. So I was able to sort of track the invasion. Now it's all up and down. This is Greylen Beach Road. And this is the dune. This is basically the foredune, and then the invasion, actually the worst, was right here, and then this is your wetland right here. And this was all private property along State Route 105. And so these people hadn't messed around with it very much. They didn't even really realize anything was out there. So the state, Washington State Parks and Rec had messed around with the gorse that was next to the road, so I didn't deal with that gorse. I just left it out of the study site. So just briefly, I went out and mapped all the thickets that I could find in this one particular area, and then picked random spots and all the wonderful things you have to do to make sure that your study's unbiased. So this would be an example of a plot. We plotted, and then we put it on a grid, and then we picked numbers randomly off the grid. And then we had to go find the gorse stem that was closest to whatever numbers that we found, which was where the chainsaws came in. So we would take the nearest gorse stem we could to the random grid points that we picked, and then we sample 10 centimeters, 4 different places around the stem. We also sampled the foliage, but it wasn't really interesting or significant to management. It's not, I don't think it had any applications. We did bulk densities on the soil, and what I did was I simply counted rings, and I had to prove that that was actually a legitimate way to age gorse, but in fact it is. We live in an area where gorse is very easy to count the rings on, so that's how I aged the infestation. It wouldn't work on an older site, so I had to be very sure that the gorse had really come in within the last 25 to 30 years. It did line up nicely with how old gorse was. Some of the gorse was obviously getting to the end of its life, and it had not burned. That area had not burned, and so we didn't have that secondary growth coming in. And then the controls got taken in the grass. So what I was really looking at on some level is how the gorse was changing the soil versus how the grass was changing the soil. But that was really the only choice I had. So this example, cutting down the gorse stem, counting the rings, looking at bulk density, volumes, and all sorts of things, and keeping notes. So we did this all over our little study area one summer. And the soil data that I collected was pH, all the major nutrients that you care about, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, different types of nitrogen, organic matter, cation exchange capacity, which is something a lot of, is used in agriculture a lot, soluble salts, a bunch of the micronutrients, and also bulk density. So it's really trying to get a handle on, you know, where would we go, what was the soil doing. Okay, so my results were that increasing in the soil was all the nitrogens, organic matter, soluble salts, manganese, lead, nickel, and chromium. And initially, I was thinking that those heavy metals had increased because of some of the industry that was in the nearby area. It turns out, Sherry actually sent me a PowerPoint, and I have yet to get a hold of the guy. He hasn't published the results as far as I can tell, and he also saw these increases in heavy metals. So it may be something Gorse is doing. But significantly decreasing is pH, and that's definitely of interest to land managers as well. Kind of depends on what kind of area you're trying to restore and what you're trying to restore it to. But certainly these are major things to new plants coming in. Okay, so these are box plots. This is pH. This is the gorse. So the pH here is down, and you know it's averaging about 4.8. And in the grass, it's way up at 5.4, and I'll explain why that could be of incredible importance. But Gorse is also collecting these soluble salts, and then the control. And these are dunes, right? So you know, normally water is supposed to just sort of go through them, and they're not supposed to be collecting a whole lot of anything. So over time, all right, so that I could actually track with a linear regression, we saw an increase in nitrogen, organic matter, and lead, and a decrease in bulk density and pH. Okay, so I have a couple of these pictures. Gorse is increasing the nitrogen by 1% every year, which is quite a lot. So you can see the rings, really, I mean, really nice rings counts I got from a little less than 5 years to just over 25. And the linear regression is definitely significant. The R-squared shows how much of the variation is due to just this one factor. So that's pretty large in a natural system. We've got a lot of stuff going on. pH is decreasing at 0.03, whatever I mean by A, 0.03 a year. That may not seem like a lot, but actually, as you can see over the years, it ends up being quite a lot. We're going from a pH is sort of acidy, northwesty acidy, to into the 4s, which is really, really high acid for plants. And then organic matter is building like crazy. So if you've ever, seen underneath a gorse plant, it's building organic matter like mad, right? And I've seen and I saw in the literature that people think that that heat stimulates seed growth. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but I can tell you that I can take a handful of gorse seeds and I can get it to sprout. It's easy. I mean, it doesn't need scarification. It doesn't need heat. It doesn't need anything. So I actually think that one of the things Gorse is doing is like building this big seed bed for itself, and it's just continually piling organic matter on top. And when it burns, I mean, it's got this huge seed bed, right? Well, the top half of it burns, and what have you got left? This huge seed bed. It's like, woohoo, rain on me, you know? And it just sprouts like crazy. All right, so what are the implications of this, some of this stuff to management? Probably the most important changes that I saw that would be interesting to managers is the increase in nitrogen, the decrease in pH, and the increase in organic matter. So these are going to matter to plants. Now, whether it matters in the place where you're working and what you're trying to plant, it may or may not matter. So, but it's certainly something to keep in mind, because I was looking at the top 10 centimeters. This is generally the area where seedlings are pulling out most of its nutrients and where you find most nutrients in a soil, in the soil system. The pH fell from 5.4 to 4.8. And that's very significant to plants. Most plants don't like pH 4.8. Even Northwest plants don't like pH 4.8. We do tend to be on the acid side because of our rain, but that's far more acid than you normally get in the Northwest. Aluminum and manganese levels were not significantly changed by the Gorse. But when you have pH levels dropping like that, aluminum and manganese do become more available, and that's enough of a pH drop that both of those can become toxic even when the initial levels weren't that high. So that can be a real problem depending on if you're trying to put in new plants. You may need to deal with the fact that that pH is too low. And you can, soil tests aren't that expensive, especially if you're putting in a lot of plants that are, that cost a lot of money to put in, to try to figure out whether or not you're going to have that kind of problem between aluminum and manganese and your pH levels. So the average manganese in this particular site was 8.65. In this site, it was unlikely to be a problem. It's low even with pH levels dropping, but the aluminum level probably was becoming a problem in this site. So if these people ever wanted to restore this area, there was nobody even talking about it at the time. And that picture that I have is current, so I don't think anybody's done anything since. You might need to do something about the pH in order to not get aluminum toxicity in your plants. Okay, lead, nickel, and chromium were all increasing significantly, but even though those were increasing significantly, those actual parts per million are not enough to bother plants. So, I mean, there's a difference between, whoa, I found significant results as far as, the math is concerned, and, ooh, I found significant results as far as plants are concerned. So, we did see increases in heavy metals. It looks like this other guy saw increases in heavy metals too. These are not to be worried about at these levels. Okay, I have no idea why Gorse is increasing. I think our local gorse may be growing taller. It's definitely growing in the wetlands. I think it has stronger vegetative growth. I saw it layering, and in the literature from England, it says this plant does not layer. Baloney. I mean, it pull a branch up and it's got roots on it. It's layering, It may fix more nitrogen than it's fixing in its native range, and the VOC production may actually be different as well. So it kind of depends on what soil it might be growing on too. As far as I know, most people have not really thought about this a whole lot. The reason why I think that we might be getting rapid evolution is because when you've got a seed bank that's that prolific and then only 1-2 plants sprout, you've got a really strong bottleneck effect. Even if you've only got several generations, you can actually see an allele differentiation between the two generations, even without a lot of rapid reproductive rate. So the considerations that I think I came up with, at least with what I saw, was that change in fertility might be a problem if you're trying to manage something for a low fertility system. So that might be a problem, for example, in something like sand dunes. It might not be a problem if you're doing timberland. You might not care at all right? But you might not want to replant your trees in there without looking at the pH and the aluminum and the manganese levels. And then that prolific seed bank is a real problem. I know that years ago when they talked about plans for you know, restoration and stuff, there were often not plans put in place for very many years after the restoration. And when you get a seed bank like that, that means that if that soil's disturbed, it's going to sprout again. And I'm sure some of you that management with this plant know people that have gone in, for example, and decided to bulldoze where there's been gorse. And it's appalling, right? I mean, it just sprouts like a big green mat. And so one of the best ways that you could deal with gorse is to carefully go in there and cut and paint and then carefully sort of make sure that, you know, that seed bank doesn't get re-exposed as much as possible. So I can't think of anything that has quite the extensive seed bank that I've seen this plant have. And these are the people at the University of Washington that helped me out, and a whole lot of people from Parks and Rec and stuff like that. So, and then the original, all the tests were paid for by Montana State. So, questions?
If the aluminum is increasing, ought to kill the gorse?
Gorse seems to have a really high resistance to practically anything. I think that's one of the reasons why it is so invasive. It can grow like, to find this research site was difficult because gorse can, I mean, a lot of gorse infestations like up on Vancouver Island and in the San Juans is all in rock and stuff. I mean, the thing can sprout practically no soil at all.
Two questions. One is, does anybody know if gorse has any allelopathic characteristics other than this kind of change you're talking about?
As far as I know, allelopathic tendencies are really, really difficult to prove. People hypothesize them, but they, you know, they actually pinpoint a one-on-one correlation. And as far as I know, nobody has for this plant.
Seems to have, I mean,
yeah, I mean, it may be that this is how allelopathic really is
yeah.
It's not that direct. It's sort of an indirect thing.
The other question is, you were thinking about the pollination system that it has. Is that what gets to the genetics? Aren't they self-pollinated or not?
I think they'll pollinate self or other, or they're just...
I never see very many pollinators on vast swaths of this stuff. There's almost no insect pollinators on it, you would expect for a colorful pollination.
Yeah, and I don't, you know, I haven't done a lot of work with that, but it probably doesn't need very many pollinators with that many flowers, you know, so, yeah.
We're from that neck of the woods up there.
Are you?
The interesting thing is for the gorse around there, it only blooms one time a year for about 2 months on the Long Beach Peninsula in that area.
It's really wet out there.
Yeah, and what you said also is that it's starting to grow other places. We've seen that too, where it's non-sandy soil. It's also starting to grow inland more.
Yeah.
We're finding patches there. And as far as the lead, the nickel, and the chromium, we did some mussel watch studies up there, or mussel studies up there. And the same metals are high in the mussels up there also.
So it might be like Aberdeen and...
Well, we're talking the area that we were in Willapa Bay, you know, right around the Nakata area.
Oh yeah, where they're trying to get rid of the
well, there's a lot of shipyards that were in those areas too, and we've kind of hypothesized with the mussels that had to do with a lot of the metals that were still there from the vacant shipyards, but you're finding it up on the shoreline, so I mean, I don't know.
The shore is shifting pretty dramatically in some areas too. I mean, it's kind of hard to tell what's going on.
Yeah, and that's...
And isn't there also a lot of pollution coming over from China on this coast? So it's really, I mean, I was like, you know, I'm not even going to hypothesize where all this comes from. Yeah, go ahead.
I was also going to say about the sand also and the grasses earlier. I was wondering if, you know, we're having a lack of recruitment of sand on our beaches, and we're actually starting to, with the Army Corps of Engineers, has been taking dredge spoils and dumping it way off the coast. So we have, for decades, have not been getting the sand recruitment. And now they've instituted a new program where they're starting to pump sand right onto the beach, right on the Washington side. And that's the reason you're having the coastlines eroding there, and also right where you're at, the Washaway Beach.
Oh, right. That was just south of there. That was incredible. What was the Yes.
Did you do any plant tissue tests, or did you just stick with soil?
No, I did do plant tissue tests, and they weren't particularly, I mean, some of them said some things, but like the nitrogen actually went down in the foliage, and it wasn't clear why.
Did you do it throughout the year, or just a single
Just
test?
that one test, yeah. And so there wasn't a lot I could conclude from it, and you know, there's a big difference between what's in the soil and what the plant's actually taking up. And as plants get older, they tend to take up less too. So there were a lot of other things that could be involved. So there wasn't a lot to see from the outcome. Yeah.
What did you mean by higher fertility and low fertility systems?
So in some restoration sites, people actually are trying to restore low fertility systems. And if a plant's come in and turn it into a high fertility system, that's actually something that you sometimes have to correct for. It seems kind of backward to those of us that are like, well, in agriculture, it's always better to have high fertility, right? But that's actually not always the goal of a restoration. And a specific restoration would have a specific goal as far as where they were going, and it might be a lower fertility system. Sometimes what they think, like in England where this plant's native, it's probably part of a regular like climax situation where it comes in, you know, it's a pioneer species, it puts nitrogen in the soil, and then the next thing comes in, takes advantage of that nitrogen, and then, you know, eventually ends up being a forest type, you know. But here it's cycling in this 30-year cycle with burning, and it's not good.